Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you who've dialed into our investor call with the management of Healios. My name is Kincaid. I'm the Director of Research and one of the Senior Biotech Analysts here at Chardon. As call participants are aware, our focus at Chardon is on identifying companies that can generate exceptionally high long-term investment returns by creating shared value for society through disruptive innovation. Joining me on the call this morning is the Chief Executive Officer of Healios, Rich Kincaid. Before we get started, just some compliance issues. During this call, we will not be discussing Chardon research. Any discussion about research should be coordinated between our participant and their respective salesperson at Chardon. A recording of this call will be made available to clients after the call. By participating in this call, our speaker attests that they have made Chardon aware of any potential conflicts, and they will not discuss any material, non-public, or confidential information that they are aware of that may breach their legal, regulatory, or fiduciary responsibility to any parties. With that said, for anyone in our audience who'd like to submit a question to ask of management, please email it to me at knakae@chardon.com. So with all of that out of the way, Rich, thanks so much for joining us today. Maybe to start, let me ask you, Rich, to spend a couple of minutes to provide some background and a brief overview of Healios for investors who are new to the story.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Kay. It's great to be here with you today. So I'm Richard Kincaid. I'm actually the CFO of Healios, which is a Japanese listed company, and I'm the CEO of its US subsidiary. And so I sort of hold both those roles simultaneously. I go back and forth between Japan and the US constantly. I've been with Healios for about 8 years. Healios is a leading cell therapy company in Japan. We're listed there and have been for quite a while. Listed in 2015 after being founded in 2011. Healios was founded by Dr. Hardy Kagimoto. He's an ophthalmologist, and he founded the company to develop iPS cell-derived therapies for the eye. So originally it was an iPS cell-derived RPE cell product for eye disease that we built way back when. This was before iPS cells got the Nobel Prize. And so we made this product. This is back starting in 2011, put it into human patients in 2013 and then 2015. It was actually the first iPS cell-derived product used in humans in the world. So we were a pioneer in the iPS cell space, but we listed in 2015, expanded our horizons, started to work on multipotent adult progenitor cells, which are not an iPS cell-derived product. It's an adult bone marrow-derived product. And we were partnered with a company called Athersys. So we did that in Japan for critical care indications, both ischemic stroke and acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. And if we sort of fast forward to today, that MAPC platform is our proprietary platform. We acquired it, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that today. And that is the focus. Specifically, MAPC is focused on acute respiratory distress syndrome. And the two big focuses for execution in the firm right now are, one, getting that approved in Japan based on phase 2 data. And so we have a confirmed path for conditional approval in Japan. So we're about to become a commercial company there. And then two, we've launched and are going to be enrolling globally, centered in the US, a global phase 3 study called Revive ARDS in pneumonia-induced ARDS. And so those are the two focuses. There's a lot more to the company because we've been at this for 15 years, but we're very focused on execution of those two things currently.
Well, great. Well, certainly a key inflection point was when you did actually acquire the assets of the former Athersys, who you had this long-standing partnership with in January of 2024. Athersys had spent nearly 20 years and over 700 million trying to develop imvemmistrocel, or what they called multi-stem. And you bought them out of bankruptcy for a mere pittance of 2.25 million. So beyond imvemmistrocel, what else did you acquire that's important in that acquisition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we joke, and the risk of digressing, in Japan at New Year's, there's a thing you can buy at the department store in the basement, or actually across the floors, called a fukubukuro, which is like a lucky bag. And for any of you on the call who've been through a bankruptcy process, there's a lot that you might pick up when you take a company through bankruptcy. We actually took them into a bankruptcy, funded the bankruptcy process with a $2.25 million DIP loan. That being so, there were quite a few things that we picked up, but I think the things that really matter. I mean, InvMestrocell on that technology platform is what really matters. It was about 400 patents. It was a lot of clinical product, a lot of data. Um, and the strategic imperative as we acquired the technology was um, take control of it and bring it to the FDA, run an end of phase two meeting to run a pivotal trial in ARDS to go for an ARDS approval globally, right? We wanted to develop the drug for ARDS. The incremental things I think of extreme value that we got um, are connected to InvMestrocell, but beyond ARDS, right? And so there was an ongoing phase two trauma study called Matrix One happening at University of Texas, Houston, that was funded at the time with a grant by Department of Defense, and um, we picked that up and are taking it forward now. And so that's a very important study and a really interesting indication for us. And so when we think about what we're developing, it's both focused on ARDS today, but um, that phase two study is a 156 patient study. That's a lot of patients, and having the relationship with MTech/DoD via that study is important to us. I think the other thing to focus on, and we can talk a lot about this today, that's so central to cell therapy development is manufacturing technology. Athersys spent a lot of money over an extended period of time developing this platform. And I think they were visionaries and they did a lot of work really, really well, had some great people. I think they were probably a little bit early and in their aggression at spending money in relation to manufacturing scale up. But we are benefiting from that today, and we're very grateful for that. A lot of that money that was spent on building their way from 2D manufacturing into bioreactor-based manufacturing. And so when we commercialize in Japan, we have the commercial suite up now. This is at Minaris in Yokohama. It's a suite that is making the product in 50-liter bioreactors. And when we get our approval, we believe it'll be the first allogeneic cell therapy approved anywhere in the world using a bioreactor. And I can't tell you how important it is. I mean, I can't overly stress it because I've been here for 8 years, watched us make the product in 2D, watched how hard it was. I've told people a gazillion times that 2D manufacturing and cell therapy is not really a commercial process. It's hard to make enough product to make it matter. It's hard to make it cost efficiently, and it's subject to a lot of risk. Athersys did their work well, and they scaled up not only to the 50-liter reactor, which we're using for initial commercialization, but also a 500-liter process. So we picked up that 500-liter process, and I think we'll talk about it more today, but we're getting a commercial suite up in 500 liters now based on that technology. There's no way we could have done this fast without the work they did to validate that process.
Okay, well, great. Well, let's talk about the cells themselves a little bit. What you call multipotent adult progenitor cells or MAPS, and maybe just describe some of the key differences between your type of cell and pluripotent stem cells. And I guess given your cells commit a differentiation, what is their primary therapeutic benefit?
Sure. Well, thanks so much. And we obviously have expertise in both in the iPS cell field and in the kind of bone marrow derived MAPC technology that's proprietary to us. And um, we tend to think of the iPS cells. I mean, they can become any cell in the body, and we're making living medicines from them in the form of cells that have either the capacity to replace damaged tissue organs or that have some function. So theoretically, we can make iPSL-derived MAPCs, right? For example, but we start off our existence to making iPSL-derived RP cells, right, for AMD patients, and so that's a replacement therapy. And so we sort of have this bucket of iPSL kind of cell types that we can make that are creating a replacement therapy product. But we also make iPSL derived NK cells, which create NK cells that have a specific function. So our MAPCs are not pluripotent. They can't become any cell in the body. It's the end state that we're a cell type that we've derived from bone marrow, and the advantage of it specifically, and I guess it's a compare and contrast in a way versus MSCs, we're taking donor tissue. We are making through a proprietary process this MAPC, which is very drug-like, right? It's in the nature of it, its innate characters that it has a very high number of doublings that we can get from a single donor. And so we make a lot of it from donor tissue. We can make hundreds of thousands of doses from a single donor. And so there's a convenience in it where with an iPS cell, you have to kind of differentiate it to the MAPC, and you're creating something that is equivalent to that natural cell. We're actually in the actual cell. That cell is again very drug-like. We infuse it into patients. It's a frozen product, thaw it, infuse it into patients, and it goes into their system, and it doesn't persist for all that long.
Mhm.
That's not the goal. The mechanism in the critical care setting is multimodal, but it's a highly anti-inflammatory cell. It's immunomodulatory. We think of it as like the homeostasis cell. And so in the context of acute inflammation, we put it in the body of the patient. It homes to acute inflammation. It changes that inflammatory profile of immune cells to one that's either neutral or anti-inflammatory. It also has reparative properties in the body. So again, it's as is differentiated in a straightforward manner, frankly, relative to an iPSL-derived product into this end state MAPC, then infused into the patient, in effect, like a drug, very much drug-like, relatively straightforward, and then out of the patient. With iPSL, it's more complicated. We can do it. We're very good at it. But there are questions that come up with respect to regulatory and stability and ultimately, is it really the same thing as the MAPC we're making?
And then just maybe from a business perspective, what are the other advantages of your MAPS versus PSC? And I'm thinking more about its allogeneic nature, off-the-shelf therapies,
Sure.
and then obviously manufacturing.
Yeah, and again, I think our predecessors with this drug platform, Athersys, did their work very well at identifying and then streamlining and optimizing a platform to make it as drug-like, straightforward in terms of logistics and administration as possible. But the cells are innately off the shelf. And so maybe this is something to kind of point back to in relation to iPS cells. We make iPS cell-derived NK cells, for example. We gene modify the iPS cell line so that the NK cells have, when we differentiate into the NK cell, have enhanced functionality. We don't need that with the MAPCs. We don't have to make it universal, if you will. We don't have to do any adjustments to the HLA profile, for example. These are naturally, truly off the shelf, right? There's no matching required. We can cryogenically preserve them for a very long period of time, or up to 7 years in terms of shelf life today. So it's an off-the-shelf therapy. We can use it in any patient with no matching, right? We thaw, we infuse in an IV bag. Takes like an hour or so to do this in the critical care setting. And it's the sickest of patients with an extremely favorable safety profile, no safety issues at all. And so that's what we're dealing with here. And because of that, and the natural kind of profile of these cells not causing any immune response in the patients, kind of is one thing, one reason why we don't need to go kind of the iPSL route and kind of somehow use a modified starting cell line.
So, the primary focus right now is obtaining regulatory approval for imlifidase as a treatment for acute respiratory distress syndrome, which, simply stated, is a form of respiratory failure due to excessive fluid buildup in the lungs, which can result from a variety of factors, including infection, trauma, or shock. So for this condition, how do your cells address the pathology of ARDS?
Sure. Well, one of the things that attracted us to the ARDS indication, I mean, other than the data from the phase 2 studies, the mechanism is very straightforward. And I guess maybe that the explanation of that's twofold. So one is, again, as I've said, we're infusing the cells through an IV into these patients, and just naturally on the first pass, the cells will go to the lungs. And so they end up in the lungs. And that's where, in the context of ours, the inflammatory condition is. And so you have the lung tissue infiltrated by all these immune cells, inflammatory immune cells. You have fluid in the lungs. The patients get invasive mechanical ventilation. When we put our cells in the IV, they're there. And the cells naturally home to this inflammation. So they're going to stay there for a while. This is some number of days. But they then modify at the site of the inflammation the profile of those cells, and again we restore homeostasis. We see the alveolar edema subside, the fluid subside from the lungs, and the idea is, and we've seen this in both phase 2 studies, we get these patients off mechanical ventilation much faster, and reduce the morbidity and mortality associated with that condition. And the cells also have reparative properties, right? And so not only are you kind of modulating the immune system, clearing the inflammation, but you then have repair going on in that lung tissue. And because the cells go to the lungs, it's very direct in the case of ARDS.
So as you mentioned, you have evaluated the product in a couple of studies here for ARDS. And so maybe walk us through some of the key findings and takeaways from both the phase 2 MUST-ARDS study and then second, the OneBridge study conducted in Japan.
Sure. Yeah, and so that's great. The MUST-ARDS study was a US UK study. These are both small studies. They're both 20 by 10 treated versus control. And in the US UK study, it was a double-blind study where we compared versus placebo. And the high-level results were, we of course, as I mentioned before, the drug was safe. The median ventilator-free day improvement in the US-UK study was 12 days out of 28. And so patients on a median basis got off the ventilator 12 days faster. And then mortality fell 38% in the treated patients versus the placebo group. We did a follow-up, if you will, to that called OneBridge, which was also 20 by 10. This is in Japan. And in that case, we saw a 9-day improvement in median ventilator-free days out of 28 days. In either case, that's a really big number. And, so if we look at the average over the two, it was 10.5 median ventilator-free days improvement. Mortality fell 39% in the Japanese study. And so we saw in both ventilator-free day improvement and in mortality improvement, the numbers were very promising. And then in the US study context, they did biomarker analysis showing improvement in that you would expect. So what's happening under the hood in terms of the biology, improvement in the inflammatory biomarkers in the treated patients versus placebo. We saw some, large improvement in quality of life of the patients who were treated versus not. And so this is a set of things that we saw and that we're testing for in the phase 3 study. Our primary endpoint in our phase 3 study is mortality adjusted ventilator-free day score out of 28 days. I think the phase 3 study is consistent with the phase 2 study. Our OneBridge study was all pneumonia-induced ARDS patients, and the US-UK study was almost all pneumonia-induced ARDS patients. And so we're focusing on pneumonia-induced ARDS in the phase 3 study to keep it more homogeneous than otherwise. One change that we're making is we're treating patients faster in phase 3. And so the time to treatment, the window that's available in phase 3 is we're treating patients within 48 hours of meeting diagnostic criteria. In the phase 2 studies, we had up to 4 days in the US-UK study and up to 3 days in the Japanese study. When you look under the hood, it was very striking that the effect size, while there was an effect size across the spectrum of time to treatment, it was much sharper, larger effect size in the first 48 hours. And that makes sense for this condition. These patients are very ill. They are on mechanical ventilation. They're getting worse by the day. And intervening earlier, getting rid of that inflammation, getting repair going sooner should matter. And we saw that very clearly in our phase 2 studies across both studies. So we made that one change.
Okay, so the company's now preparing to file for a conditional time-limited PMDA approval for this drug for ARDS in Japan, which, if granted, would represent the company's first commercial approval. I think this raises an important question. And why should investors have confidence that Healios can succeed here where Athersys did not? And maybe I'll ask you to address this from a number of points. The first being, Japan is known and I think views itself as wanting to be on the leading edge of making regenerative medicines commercially available. So can you provide some perspective as a Japanese-based company of your view of the Japanese regenerative medicine regulatory framework to start?
Sure. Yes. So there's, uh, I guess, favorable regulations or relaxed regulatory framework for advanced therapies. You've seen a number of cell therapies get approval under this conditional approval path. There was a wave of them a few years ago. There was a lull, and then you've had a number of them recently. And so we're sort of in that bunch. Again, like I said, we have a confirmed path, and we work closely with Ministry of Health and PMDA to firm that up, and that's what you do for these conditional approvals. Um, the the basic notion is you prove safety and you have strong indication of efficacy, maybe not full efficacy being proven out just yet. But you pair that conditional approval up on the back of having that in phase two with a confirmatory study where you're going to prove efficacy through a properly powered, large, and preferably, I think, from the Japanese regulators' perspective, global phase three study. Our phase three study is serving two purposes. It's both a single study to go for approval globally, but it's also a confirmatory study for our conditional approval in Japan.
So again, just in terms of that definition of safety and efficacy for conditional approval, how would you frame your phase two data as meeting that bar? Certainly safety is the easier of the two, but maybe talk about the efficacy.
Sure. Yeah, there's some guidelines out there, but it's not so set in stone. I mean, I think if you don't need to be at a 0.05 to kind of prove efficacy beyond a shadow of a doubt. But we had that in certain predefined metrics in our Japanese study, right? We had a predefined comparison of our treated group versus a registry in ARDS that exists in Japan that showed very sharp efficacy. Now, when we look across the two studies and when we submitted our data, it was both the Japanese study and the US UK study, right? And we submitted them separately and combined and showed enough efficacy to meet the bar. And I don't know if they have a specific threshold. I think something like 0.1 or better is probably about where you need to be. But like I said, it was probably a combination of factors on our side where it was maybe that plus predetermined endpoints that are metrics that were actually met full efficacy. Again, I also think it matters how you're going to uplift. And so running a global phase three study, in our case, that's up to 550 patients, where we have an interim efficacy look at 300, where we can win there. I think they want to see, because you have up to 7 years to sell under conditional approval, they want to see a robust mechanism to confirm efficacy. And we didn't build that study and design it to meet that goal only, right? The scale of the study is to make it very clear in the US to the FDA, to the broader clinical community or in the commercial context to show very, very robust data, right, globally. But it sort of goes to that goes way beyond, I think, probably the threshold that would have been necessary to kind of just confirm from the Japanese approval. Like we've talked about this before, Kay, probably, which is that study's probably overpowered. But it's built to win.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a sec. Maybe just a final question here on this point, though. What, if any, potential advantages might Healios be afforded as a Japanese-based company in this process?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. As a general theme, I encourage investors to understand Healios as a as a global leader in allogeneic cell therapy that is benefiting from its Japanese roots, right, and its Japanese base currently. Like we are, I think we're an unusual Japanese biotech company because um, while most of our people and most of our activity is in Japan today, we have a U.S. presence that's growing, and we're running this global study that's centered in the U.S., right, going for U.S. approval and very much all in on that. And so there's a global ambition here and a global operation that's coming about. But it's the best of both worlds because we're getting the approval in Japan, again, confirmed path, and you'll see us file and then get the approval and launch the drug in Japan, and we'll be commercializing, right? While we're running this global phase 3, that's because we have this regulatory framework in Japan. We have on the manufacturing side a 7 billion yen grant that we got from the Japanese government, $45 million to create this 500-liter commercial suite. We'd never be able to make that investment without that. And that's industrial policy, right? And the regs are industrial policy. The funding is industrial policy. There are more funding opportunities that we're getting in relation to the phase 3 study. And so, whether it's regulatory path or whether it's non-dilutive funding, the Japanese government is leaning into this space, seen as a strategic industry. And so what that does for us, like when you think about the positioning of the company, when we're going for this US approval, so let's say ARDS data comes out, it's positive, or trauma data before that comes out and it's positive, what is the profile of the company? Commercialized in Japan, selling in Japan, we can make a margin on this drug. Right now, our first facility on the manufacturing side at Minaris in Yokohama, we can make about 1,000 doses a year in that suite. But the grant for the 500-liter manufacturing puts us in a position to make tens of thousands of doses a year. And I think people who followed cell therapy companies know that making tens of thousands of doses of a cell product is not easy. And again, having that grant funding put us in the position to kind of basically be ready for US commercialization. It's going to matter a lot when these US data points come out. It'll start with a trauma data point, and then it'll go to this ARDS phase 3 data point. We're going to be game time ready, having commercialized in Japan and have large scale manufacturing set up in Japan.
Well, great. Yeah. So those are definitely some significant advantages that you have. Let's talk about the phase 3 confirmatory study, Revive Arts. Obviously, again, designed to be #1 global, confirmatory to allow for approvals beyond Japan, but maybe just starting with the overall study design and talk about your interaction with the regulators in Japan to ensure that the way the study gets off the ground and ultimately reaches a desired endpoint such that it would satisfy the goal of being a confirmatory study, at least starting with Japan, but obviously in other geographies, including the US.
Yeah, and so we started off by going to the FDA and having an end of phase 2 meeting, right? And there was Athersys had a lot of studies that they ran over time, and they had a lot of INDs. There were 5 INDs that we picked up through the acquisition, and different indications. And there's actually one in ARDS, right? And so we're working off an existing ARDS IND, the first study that never got going, and have revised the protocol. And spent a lot of time with leading ARDS clinicians in the United States, actually in the United States and Europe and Asia, to build out that protocol and design it with perfection in mind, and brought that to the FDA and along with manufacturing plan, and had a very successful end of phase 2 meeting there. That was the first step, and it was at that time not clear to us that we'd have this conditional approval path in Japan. So we brought that result back to the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Health was like, okay, now that you're going to do that, why don't you apply for approval now, right, in Japan? And then there was a set of meetings with them and with the PMDA to align on that conditional approval path and what that confirmatory study needs to be. I mean, it's a big cell therapy study, highly powered, very well designed, with endpoints that both the FDA and the PMDA were happy with. Again, our primary endpoint is mortality adjusted ventilator free day score. And I think you know, that was a question. Was that something that the regulators were going to be happy with? And they were. Mortality obviously matters. Mortality is built into that to some degree. It's the worst relevant outcome. But as a secondary endpoint, all-cause mortality matters too. We can't get people off the ventilator faster and kill them in the process, right? That's not going to be okay. So getting alignment on the primary endpoint was important, on the statistical plan and other design features. But that's where we started, and we're building out from there to make this relevant globally in Europe and elsewhere. There's in some cases, opportunity after getting conditional approval in Japan to take that and potentially commercialize early in other markets, some in Asia, maybe some in Europe. But as a base case, it's run that global phase 3 study and make it valid as a means of getting approval globally, ex-China, right? So it's US and Europe. And US is the real prize, of course, for us as a Japanese biotech company. I think we'll talk about the commercial dynamics a little bit. Starting with commercialization in Japan, going for commercial outcome beyond Japan, US, Europe. US is like 260,000 ARDS patients a year. Europe's 130,000. Japan is 28,000 a year. So we're starting small and going to expand out. The study's meant to go for that whole market.
And maybe, since it is a global study, obviously important with respect to your conditional approval application to be able to check the box and say, yeah, we've started this confirmatory study. So maybe describe how this might roll out geographically.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's the topic du jour for us. We're very much neck deep in execution of the launch of the study. We're starting in Japan, and this may be too much detail, but for those who are into the detail, I'll kind of go through it. We ran our phase 2 study in Japan with 25 sites. We're gonna have more than that in Japan to start for this study. The global study will start in Japan, and it won't enroll there for that long because once we start selling the product in Japan, we can no longer randomize patients to placebo. And so there's parallel path right now, which is soon file for approval in Japan, 9 months later get approval in Japan, and then launch the drug for sale. Right. In parallel to that, we're about to get first patient in Japan, and we're going to enroll the study across more sites than what we had in phase 2, and that's a running start into sales, right? So same sites where we're going to sell the drug in Japan. So we're front-loading enrollment in Japan because the Japanese authorities like to see some Japanese enrollment in a confirmatory study. So we front-load enrollment there, but while we're enrolling there over the next year, we're going to be setting up enrollment in other geographies, right? So focus right now is certain Asia ex-Japan markets, Korea, Taiwan in particular, US also in parallel with that, right? And so this year for us, it started in Japan, gets Korea, Taiwan, US up. Next year, get Europe and Australia up, right? And so there's quite a few countries. We'll probably have about 80 sites. There'll be more sites in the US than anywhere else. Canada will be part of this as well. And at some point, we'll stop enrolling in Japan. The rest of the world will be where we're enrolling, again, centered in the US. So, we've got all of our vendors selected. We've got the first few sites opened up in Japan, and we're getting close to running things forward there. And we've built up a team in the US. We've talked about this, Gay, where right now there's a lot of team building going on, both on the clinical development side to be able to run this study well globally, converting consultants to employees, adding a few employees, setting up a San Fran office. And we have commercial related hiring going on in Japan, right? Commercial operations, sales, and marketing.
Yeah, I would say an underappreciated part of this initiative is all the work you're doing on the ground to set this up properly. And you have the advantage, I guess, of the Athersys experience and how to do that properly as well. So anybody that wants to take the time to dig into that, I think it would be well worth it. let's maybe shift to the commercial opportunity here. And we can't really talk about it unless we first start with the manufacturing. As you said, kind of set up right now, 50-liter scale. Where does that get you in terms of, amount of product per year? And then maybe just we'll have you describe how that's leading in based on your grant into the larger scale 500-liter manufacturing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the 50-liter system, I mean, that the capacity for that suite, it's one suite right now that we've set up at Moneris in Yokohama. And, something like 1,000 doses a year is achievable in that suite, large doses. And that's fine for initial commercialization. When we think about Japanese, commercial opportunity and sell-through and penetration in a conditional approval context, right? As a starting point, year one, year two, that suite has us covered. But we, again, are extremely grateful to what the Japanese government's doing and their support of our 500-liter manufacturing. And so the initial commercial manufacturing is happening in Yokohama, right? This is at Moneris, our CDMO partner there. The 500-liter facility is going up in Kobe right now. That'll be construction, internal construction, et cetera. Everything's gonna be done by the end of next year. Suite will be up thereafter. And that facility is designed to make up to 40,000 doses per year in the 500-liter reactor format. There's other space in that facility for other products too, like Renke program, et cetera. But for indomestrocel specifically, it's designed to make up to 40,000 doses a year. It'll take a few 500-liter suites to do that, but when one suite gets up, maybe we get 5,000 doses a year out of that, which is a lot, right? And that puts us in a different category. I don't know that any company in the world, biotech or pharma, is set up with an allogeneic cell therapy to produce cells at that volume.
And maybe just quickly comment on the technology risks to do that scale of it, because it seems like you're really benefiting here. Again, an underappreciated part of the Athersys acquisition was all of the manufacturing know-how and advancements they had made there. So scaling up from 550 to 500, maybe talk about that risk.
Yeah, they did put a lot into that, and they ran the 500-liter full scale and produced data. We've put that data out there, I think, in one of our decks that's publicly disclosed, showing that we have successfully run at 500 liters before, or Athersys did. And so, we have a lot of confidence that we can do it without a lot of time slippage, et cetera. It's, the tech transfer we did of the 50-liter process into the Moneris facility was said by the CDMO to be the smoothest tech transfer they've ever seen. It had been run 11 times successfully in the prior facility. And so we're, 550 has been very smooth. The 500, we expect it to be so too. We've got a great manufacturing team in Japan too. We've got the help of some ex-Athersys people. There were so many great people at Athersys, so I can't say that enough, that are involved in our business now, either as employees or consultants, and we are very grateful to them. But they did their work well on the manufacturing side, de-risked that platform a ton, and we're now with the Japanese government funding, going to put that suite up. And our people, I'm sure our people are going to have things to work through, but we've got some excellent people that have a lot of bioreactor process development experience. Like, we've built our NK cell bioreactor manufacturing technology ourselves, have a ton of patents on that, and have been working with cell manufacturing in different cell types, iPS cell side inclusive, for 15 years. And so a lot of confidence that we can do it.
So, maybe just qualitatively, what does the improvement in COGS look like as you go from 50 to 500?
Yeah, it improves a lot, right? And so at 50 liters, we can make a very healthy margin, right? And we can talk a little bit about pricing today and what's been happening in the Japanese market, but we're, on the one hand, like the penetration that we'd expect to get even under conditional approval, I think is improved relative to maybe some other peer cell therapies because of the ease of administration. There's no surgery required. It is a lethal condition with no approved therapies for it. And so, when we bring this thing to market here, we hope to treat uh, a lot of patients, even under conditional approval. But we can make the drug, at a reasonable volume, as we talked about, and we can make it with a healthy margin today. Um, when we get to 500 liters, like, yeah, cost of goods drops potentially a lot here, and volume goes way up, right? And so it becomes very pharma-like margins for this very drug-like cell therapy platform that, again, like, those who kind of put all these years into building it did their work very well to make something that I think as a cell therapy should be able to get a lot of market penetration and be made very cost efficiently.
Well, let's talk about pricing for a second, and reimbursable pricing specifically. Back when Temcel, which was the old mesoblast product for GVHD, was approved back in 2015, came out with pretty attractive pricing at the time. Maybe 110, 115,000 per course of treatment. As you mentioned earlier, there's been some recent iPSC approvals with even more attractive pricing. So give us a sense of where you think the pricing trend is going in Japan, and what that might look like for your product.
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's very topical because you've had two pricing events in Japan recently. And so one is Sanbio, who's one of our peers there, and they got about a $450,000 drug price, around 72 million yen. And that's a primary cell derived, like a G modified MSC product for TBI. And then Sumitomo Pharma got their iPSL-derived dopaminergic neuron product for Parkinson's priced, I think that was like $350,000, I think 52 million yen or thereabouts. And so 350 to 450K just happened for single dose regimens in Japan with cell therapies under conditional approval. That's a different regime than what we saw a few years ago with Temcel and the others in that kind of first wave of approvals. And so, I think we've been assuming a more conservative number for our internal modeling. But word on the street, at least out there, is that there's sort of potentially an industrial policy element here that's going on, a recognition of where the pricing needs to be or should be in light of kind of global development programs. And I think we're probably in a different pricing regime because of that. And so there should be, I think, some recognition of that. And again, because I believe we can probably treat more patients and given the profile of this drug and penetrate the market best in the space, I believe that might be something to pay attention to that should matter maybe a little bit more for us than many. And so it's encouraging to see the pricing be so robust in Japan.
Great. Well, maybe let's talk about some other potential pipeline opportunities. The Imvostrol has been evaluated in stroke patients. It's currently being evaluated in trauma patients in a US-based study. And for that study specifically, can you talk about any tactical strategic initiatives to maybe increase the speed of enrollment in that study?
Yeah, I sure can. Like our goal is to get that enrolled as quickly as possible, notwithstanding the fact that I've said how focused we have to be on ours, right? We sort of toggle back and forth between these things, but focus, focus, focus. Like, we have all hands on deck right now, getting this art study going, getting the arts commercialization ready. But there's enough importance seen in the trauma study that it's an additional very high priority for us, right? And so expanding the number of sites is one thing we can do to pick up the pace. When you think about the ARDS timeline, ARDS study is getting going. We're going to scale up the enrollment apparatus, across geographies, get to sort of a steady state number of sites. At that steady state, when we're going peak speed in the ARDS study, we can enroll, I don't know, 15 to 20 patients a month probably, right? And you all can do the math in terms of how long it might take us to get that fully enrolled. And if we win at 300, it's faster than 550. But the trauma data point should come out well before that, right? And when we kind of think about that study, and the primary endpoint is degree of acute kidney injury, right? These cells are going into these patients within 24 hours of their injury, right? They have a severe injury, they have hemorrhagic shock, they've lost blood, they get blood, 3 units or more, they get stabilized. And then we're giving them the cells to prevent multiple organ failure, to prevent that inflammatory cascade from destroying their organs effectively. And um, we're measuring that through acute kidney injury. And we've seen these, and we put some data out on this, seeing these cells and how protective they are of the kidneys through the lens of other studies, yard study, et cetera. And so we have a lot of optimism about how this study can turn out, and we want to get that data point out and get it to the market as soon as we can. And so accelerating enrollment is important to us. So again, just one site right now. It's University of Texas Houston. It's a busy trauma center, but there are other places where we can enroll. And so we're working closely with the clinicians that are involved to consider that.
Okay. Well, we have a few minutes left, so let me squeeze in a couple of quick questions here. First, maybe talk about your cash and what the current operating runway length that supports.
Super. Yeah. And so we did a fundraise back in Jan, Feb, launched Jan, closed Feb, and that cashed us up. And so the number is probably something like $70 million. We spent 18 last year. We're very lean, but we're ramping cash usage, given the team expansion that we've had. We increased by 15 people over the last 12 months. We'll probably increase on that order between now and year end. And as we get the study going, cash on hand is one thing. We do have some in the money fixed warrants from past deals that we'll exercise, over the next kind of year plus. So that's like $40 million. We have a couple grants we're going for. I think we've talked about this before, Kay, but there's some more opportunities in Japan that are coming our way that are seemingly like remarkably aligned with what we're doing, and so that's pretty cool. And so whether it's a Japanese phase 3 clinical trial related grant in Japan, maybe some things that we're going for in the US, we have high hopes on that. We have cash generation opportunity in a cosmetic business that we run, which is it's a culture supernatant business that's exosome enriched spit media that we produce when we manufacture Invermestrocel. We have a client in Korea, Genicel, which is a subsidiary of our business alliance partner, Alfresa. Alfresa is the second largest wholesale drug distributor in Japan. And we're working with them to expand that. And so that might bring us some incremental cash here. So we're in pretty good shape with all this support. And when you think about the events that are coming our way, right, we're going to be filing for approval and getting approval, have a product launch in Japan, right, and getting the study going and getting first patient in Japan and first patient in the US and these other markets, working towards these data points. There's a lot of news flow, and so we're feeling pretty good about our positioning, where the equity story is going and where the cash position is.
Yeah, so maybe, just to highlight those upcoming milestones, what should investors expect to hear from you about, say, in the second half of the year and then maybe in 27?
Yeah, so the big things that we're working towards with the study, getting first patient in, getting these other sites and geographies up over the second half of the year, right? Getting enrollment going in the US, getting the conditional approval filing done in Japan, right? And then subsequent to that, it takes 9 months post that to get the approval, right? And I think depending on the investor group, I think both matter a lot, but it's those two things. Again, execution areas of focus right now are global phase 3 ARD study and commercialization in Japan. And we're doing everything on those two fronts right now to get things accelerated. I think we talked about the trauma situation and where that might go. Data points a little bit of a ways away. We have potential opportunities on the culture supernatant side in terms of like business development outcomes, and then we have these grant opportunities that, in the balance of the year, there could be hopefully some outcomes on those too.
So let me ask you a final question, and maybe kind of a way to sum up everything we just talked about. But what do you think that investors are most underappreciating about the Helios story?
Yeah, no, we've talked about a lot of it today, right? I think Healios story is still relatively a lesser known story in the United States or outside of Japan. I think in Japan, it's been a long road, right? We've been at this for a while. We've been persistent in our commitment to this drug for ARDS and to ARDS patients. Um, and we're about to make it real, right? I think the market's kind of waiting for that. I think globally, in Japan too, right? But globally, um, the strength we're getting from this Japanese industrial policy support, um, the um, the nature of this drug, as we've talked about today, where it's so drug-like, cell therapies, I think, don't have um, the full support of the marketplace yet because it's been hard to turn them into actual commercialized drugs. This one is set up for that, right? Again, it's frozen, it's off the shelf, there's no matching required. We thaw it, we put it in an IV bag, put it in the patient over the course of an hour, and we manufacture it in large scale bioreactors at a reasonable cost of goods and can make a margin, right? It's not that complicated because we are where we are. It took many years of work and hundreds of millions of dollars, but now we're here, right? It's going to be commercialized, and it's just until that unfolds, it may be hard to get the market to really appreciate that this is a drug that can actually be commercialized, and we're in a better position than anyone in the world to do that, I think, right? And that's going to be made clear over the coming months.
Well, very good. Well, we reached the end of our time here today, but Richard, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for all audience members who dialed into our presentation. We will have a replay available probably within a day. But with that, thank you so much for joining us today and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.